The most dangerous man in Chicago walked into a restaurant at 8:47 on a Thursday evening, and he brought the one person who could shatter Emma Carson's carefully constructed lies: his mother. Everyone knew Dominic Castellano. The newspapers called him a businessman. The police called him untouchable. The streets called him by a different name entirely, one whispered in the dark corners of Southside bars, where men who knew better kept their voices low and their eyes on their drinks. He was the kind of man who made problems disappear, permanently, but it was the woman on his arm who turned Emma's blood to ice. Victoria Castellano, the matriarch. They said Dominic pulled the trigger, but Victoria chose the target. She was the one who decided who lived and who didn't. And now she was here in the silver rose, walking toward table 7 like a queen approaching her throne. Emma's hands trembled as she adjusted her apron for the 10th time in as many minutes. She needed to disappear. She needed to run, but Mr. Hayes was already crossing the dining room with that look on his face, the one that said her rent money depended on the next 5 minutes of her life. Table 7, he hissed, grabbing her elbow. VIPs. If you drop so much as a fork, you're on the street. Do you understand me? Emma understood. She understood that 3 years of hiding were about to end. She understood that the past she'd buried was clawing its way back to the surface. She understood that the sleeping 3-year-old boy in Mrs. Gable's duplex across town had eyes that would give away every secret she'd ever kept. But first, there was the memory. The one that still woke her at 3 in the morning, heart racing, sheets tangled around her legs like accusations. 3 years ago, she'd been someone else entirely. The Belmont estate rose from the lakefront like something out of a fairy tale, all limestone and wrought iron, lit from within by 1,000 candles. Emma had been 21 then, young enough to believe in fresh starts, desperate enough to take a catering job that paid under the table. College had ended abruptly 6 months earlier when the money ran out and the loans came due. The catering gig was supposed to be temporary, just enough to get back on her feet. The masquerade ball was the kind of event where Chicago's elite came to pretend they were mysterious. Venetian masks and champagne, string quartets playing Vivaldi, women in silk gowns worth more than Emma would earn in a year. She'd worn the standard catering uniform, black pants, white shirt, invisible. That was the plan anyway. She'd been carrying a tray of champagne flutes through the garden when she took a wrong turn down a gravel path. The hedge maze loomed ahead, dark and inviting, and Emma had paused to catch her breath away from the glittering crowd. That's when she'd stumbled into him. Literally stumbled. The tray tilted, champagne arcing through the air in a golden spray, and then his hands were on her shoulders, steadying her, saving the tray, saving her job, saving everything. Easy, he'd said, and his voice was like smoke, low and rough and intimate. You're safe. He'd worn a black mask that covered the upper half of his face, but his eyes were visible. One brown, one an impossible shade of gray-blue, like winter ice over deep water. She'd never seen eyes like that before. They'd held her frozen, unable to look away. I'm so sorry, Emma had managed. I didn't see you. I should have been watching where I was going. Don't apologize. He'd smiled then, and it had transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her chest tight. The party is tedious. I came out here to escape. Apparently so did you. They'd talked for 20 minutes that became 40, that became an hour. He'd introduced himself as Dante, which she'd later realized was a lie. But in that moment, under the stars with the music drifting over the hedges, it hadn't mattered. He told her about growing up in a family where duty mattered more than desire. She told him about her parents dying in a car accident when she was 19, about dropping out of school, about feeling lost. You're not lost, he'd said, and the certainty in his voice had made her believe it. You're just between destinations. The kiss had been inevitable. Soft at first, testing, then deeper as she'd risen on her toes and he'd pulled her closer, his hands in her hair, her fingers clutching the lapels of his suit jacket, the taste of champagne and possibility. Come with me, he'd whispered against her mouth, and she had. The private room had been on the 3rd floor overlooking the lake, silk sheets and moonlight, and the kind of passion Emma had only read about in books. He'd been gentle, reverent, like she was something precious. When she'd gasped at the first touch of his hands on her bare skin, he'd paused. We can stop, he'd said. Say the word and we stop. But she hadn't wanted to stop. She'd wanted to feel alive again, wanted to forget about bills and loneliness and the grinding weight of just surviving. For one night, she'd wanted to be someone different, someone wanted, They'd fallen asleep tangled together, his heartbeat steady under her ear, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. Emma had thought in that drowsy moment before sleep took her that maybe this was the fresh start she'd been looking for. Maybe Dante was the answer to prayers she'd been too tired to pray. She'd woken to voices, his voice specifically coming from the bathroom. The door had been cracked open just enough for sound to carry. Emma had blinked in the gray morning light, disoriented, reaching for him and finding only cold sheets. Make it clean. His voice had been different. Not smoke anymore. Ice. Pure ice. No witnesses. I don't care if he begs. He knew the rules when he crossed me. A pause. Then colder still. Everyone has a family, Marco. Everyone has something they love. That's what makes them weak. That's how you control them. Now handle it before I have to fly out there myself. Emma had frozen, her hand hovering over the place where he'd been. The tenderness from the night before dissolved like sugar and acid. She'd seen a gun when he'd removed his jacket, hanging in a shoulder holster, and he'd noticed her noticing. Protection, he'd said with an easy smile. Can't be too careful these days. But this wasn't protection. This was something else entirely. This was a man who ordered death the way normal people ordered coffee. Casual, efficient, without a shred of remorse. Emma had dressed in 30 seconds, moving silently, every survival instinct screaming at her to run. She'd grabbed one thing on her way out, his mask, the black Venetian mask he'd worn at the party. It was stupid, sentimental, but she'd needed proof that the tender man from the garden had been real, even if the monster in the bathroom was what he truly was. She'd fled down the servants' stairs, out through the kitchen, past security guards too busy with the cleanup to notice one more catering worker leaving early. By the time the sun came up, Emma had been on a bus heading south, away from the Belmont estate, away from Dante, away from the biggest mistake of her life. The pregnancy test had come back positive 6 weeks later. Emma's apartment in South Chicago was 800 square feet of peeling paint and radiators that clanged through the night. But it was hers. More importantly, it was anonymous, the kind of place where no one asked questions because everyone had secrets they needed to keep. She stood in the tiny bathroom now, 3 years after that night, watching Gabriel splash in the tub. He was small for 3, with her dark curls and delicate features. But those eyes, God, those eyes. One brown like hers, one gray-blue like his father's. Heterochromia, the pediatrician had called it. A genetic quirk. 1 in a million, and it would mark him forever. Mama, look! Gabriel held up a rubber duck, grinning. He's swimming. I see, baby. Emma's voice was thick. She knelt beside the tub, running her fingers through his wet hair. You're such a good swimmer. Like a fishy. He made the duck dive under the water. Emma's phone buzzed on the sink. The screen showed the time, 6:15. Her shift at the Silver Rose started at 7. Mrs. Gable would be here in 20 minutes to watch Gabriel overnight. The restaurant paid double for late shifts, and Emma needed every dollar. The medical bills were piling up. Gabriel's asthma had been getting worse, and the medication the insurance company actually covered barely helped. The stuff that worked cost $340 a month. Emma had been stretching it, cutting doses in half, praying it would be enough. The rent was late. 5 days late. Mr. Kowalski had been understanding so far, but understanding only lasted until the first of the next month. After that came eviction notices. Bath time's over, sweetie. Emma lifted Gabriel out, wrapping him in a threadbare towel with cartoon dinosaurs on it. Let's get you in your pajamas. Story, Gabriel asked hopefully. Mrs. Gable will read you a story. Emma's throat tightened. Mama has to go to work. Okay. He hugged her neck, wet and warm and perfect. Love you, Mama. Love you too, baby. So much. More than you'll ever know, she thought. More than anything in this world. The bus ride to the Silver Rose took 40 minutes. Emma spent it staring out the window at the city sliding past. Chicago at night was all neon and shadow, promise and threat in equal measure. Somewhere out there, Dominic Castellano ran an empire built on violence and fear. Somewhere out there, the father of her child gave orders that ended lives. And tonight, apparently, he was coming to her restaurant. The Silver Rose occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse in the meatpacking district, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of studied casualness that cost a fortune to achieve. White tablecloths, fresh roses in crystal vases, a wine list that required a sommelier to navigate. The clientele matched the decor. State senators, federal judges, CEOs whose companies made products Emma couldn't afford to buy. And sometimes men like Dominic Castellano, whose business interests were better left unexamined. Mr. Hayes was sweating when Emma arrived, dabbing at his forehead with a handkerchief that had seen better days. He managed the restaurant with the nervous energy of a man constantly expecting disaster, which, to be fair, probably matched the reality of his job. Table 7, he said without preamble. VIPs arriving at 8:30. These are not people we upset, Bennett. These are not people we make wait for their appetizers. These are the kind of people who can make this restaurant disappear with a phone call. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Emma understood. She'd been understanding things she didn't want to understand for 3 years now. Who is it? She asked, even though she didn't want to know. Hayes just shook his head and walked away, which was answer enough. Emma tied her apron with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She'd been a waitress for 2 years now, ever since Gabriel turned 1 and staying home stopped being an option. The Silver Rose paid better than most places, probably because of clients like whoever was coming to table 7. Clients who tipped in hundreds but expected perfection. The dining room was already filling up when the doors opened at 7. Emma moved through her section on autopilot, taking orders, delivering drinks, smiling until her face hurt. The Thursday evening crowd was lighter than weekends, but still substantial, enough to keep her busy, enough to maybe hide in. At 8:45, the front doors opened, and the entire restaurant fell silent. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was instantaneous, like someone had flipped a switch that turned off every conversation at once. Emma looked up from the drink station and felt her heart stop. 2 men entered first. Security. You could tell from the way they moved, scanning the room with flat professional eyes, hands resting casually near where their jackets bulged slightly. One was massive, 6 feet, and then some with the build of someone who'd spent serious time in a gym. The other was leaner but no less dangerous, moving with the fluid precision of a predator. Then he walked in. Dominic Castellano. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her lungs seized up like all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. She'd seen his picture in the newspapers, of course, grainy surveillance photos and courthouse sketches, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of him. He was taller than she remembered, 6'3" at least, broad through the shoulders in a way that made his charcoal 3-piece suit look like armor. The suit probably cost more than Emma's car, back when she'd had a car. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples, and his face was carved from granite, all sharp angles and cold beauty. But it was his eyes that destroyed her. One brown, one gray-blue. The exact same impossible color she saw every morning when Gabriel looked up at her over breakfast. Emma grabbed the edge of the counter to keep from falling. This was real. He was real. Dante from the masquerade was Dominic Castellano, and he was walking toward table 7 like he owned the place, which he probably did. Men like him owned everything. The woman on his arm made Emma's blood freeze. Victoria Castellano moved like royalty, small and elegant in a severe black dress that probably cost more than Emma earned in 6 months. Her silver hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful. She carried a cane, but Emma could tell it wasn't for support. It was a weapon, a statement. She used it to point at things that displeased her, and from the way the staff scrambled out of her path, she displeased easily. They walked to table 7. Table E. Dominic pulled out the chair for his mother with movements that were fluid and graceful and somehow threatening. He didn't look around the room. He didn't acknowledge the stares. He owned the space just by being in it. Emma shrank back behind the espresso machine, pressing herself against the wall, trying to become invisible. Maybe Mr. Hayes would assign someone else. Maybe Sarah could take the table. Maybe Emma could fake a sudden illness, something violent and immediate that required her to leave right now. Bennett! Hayes's voice cut through her panic. He was beside her, fingers digging into her elbow. Table 7. Now. Mr. Hayes, please. Emma heard the desperation in her own voice. I'm not feeling well. I think I might faint. Can't Sarah take them? Sarah is stuck with the senator's party. Hayes's face was red, sweating harder now. You take table 7 or you're fired. Right now. And I'll make sure you don't get a reference for so much as a dishwashing job in this city. Move. Emma looked at the back door, at escape, at safety. Then she thought about Gabriel, about the asthma medication, about rent that was 5 days late and would be 10 days late if she lost this job, about the electricity bill and the credit card that was maxed out and the checking account that showed $247. She had no choice. Emma took a breath that felt like drowning. She forced a smile onto her face, plastic and professional. She picked up her order pad like it was a shield. and she walked toward the table where Monsters sat. Dominic was adjusting his cufflinks when she arrived. Gold flashed under the chandelier light. His hands were large with long fingers, and Emma remembered those hands on her skin, gentle and reverent, 3 years ago in a room full of moonlight. Good evening. Her voice came out surprisingly steady. Welcome to the Silver Rose. My name is Emma, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink? Dominic didn't look up. He continued with his cufflinks, focused on some microscopic adjustment that apparently required his full attention. Sparkling water for the table. His voice was a deep baritone that vibrated through Emma's chest, bringing with it a flash of memory. That voice whispering promises in the dark. That voice saying her name like a prayer. A bottle of the 95 Barolo, decanted. Emma wrote it down with a hand that trembled. She turned to Victoria. And for you, ma'am? Victoria Castellano turned her head slowly, like a hawk focusing on prey. Her eyes were dark and sharp and utterly merciless. They locked onto Emma's face with an intensity that was almost physical, stripping away layers, seeing things Emma had spent 3 years trying to hide. You have an accent, Victoria said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Slight, but it's there. Not Chicago, not New York, somewhere softer. Kentucky? Tennessee? Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd worked so hard to scrub the rural lilt from her voice, the telltale signs of her upbringing in the hills of eastern Kentucky. Apparently, it hadn't been hard enough. I've moved around a lot, ma'am. The lie came smoothly. 3 years of practice. I suppose I've picked up bits and pieces from everywhere. Victoria hummed. It was a low, skeptical sound that made the hair on Emma's neck stand up. The menu, Victoria demanded, holding out one hand without breaking eye contact. Emma handed over the leather-bound menu. As she did, her sleeve rode up slightly. Just an inch. Just enough to reveal the faint, jagged line of a scar on the inside of her wrist. An old burn from a kitchen accident when she was 12, back when she'd had parents who'd rushed her to the emergency room and held her hand while the doctor worked. Dominic's eyes flicked up. For the first time, the boss looked at the waitress. His gaze landed on the scar, then traveled up to her face. Emma froze. She saw it happen in real time, the gears turning behind those impossible eyes. A flicker of recognition, a shadow of doubt. He narrowed his eyes, studying her features. The curve of her jaw, the shape of her nose, the way she held herself, he was remembering. She could see it. The masquerade, the garden, the girl in the catering uniform who'd stumbled into him with champagne and apologies. He'd searched for her afterward, had men combing the city for a catering worker named Isabel, but the company had folded within 6 months. Records destroyed. Without her real name, she'd been a ghost. Do we have a problem? Dominic asked. His voice had dropped an octave, becoming something that raised goosebumps on Emma's arms. Emma realized she'd been staring. She quickly lowered her eyes, focusing on her order pad like it held the secrets of the universe. No, sir. My apologies. I'll fetch the wine immediately. She turned and fled toward the bar, her heart beating so fast she thought she might actually go into cardiac arrest right there in the middle of the dining room. Behind her, she heard Victoria's voice, cool and amused. Who is she? Emma didn't hear Dominic's response. She was already pushing through the kitchen doors, gasping for air, pressing her back against the cool metal of the walk-in refrigerator. He'd looked at her, really looked at her, and he'd almost remembered this was going to be a very long night. The dinner service that followed was an exercise in controlled terror. Every time Emma approached table 7, she felt like she was walking a tightrope over a pit filled with razors. She poured the wine with surgical precision, terrified that a single drop spilled on the white tablecloth would be the end of everything. Her job, her anonymity, her carefully constructed life. Dominic remained quiet throughout the meal, brooding over his veal marsala like it had personally offended him. He barely touched his food. Instead, he spent the evening watching the room with those unsettling eyes, his gaze constantly flicking back to Emma whenever she was within 10 feet of the table. It wasn't the look of a man interested in a woman. Emma had seen that look before, in the eyes of customers who'd asked for her number, who'd left their hotel room keys with the check. This was different. This was the look of a man trying to solve a puzzle, and the puzzle was her. Victoria, on the other hand, was clearly enjoying herself. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, using each course as an excuse to make Emma speak, to ask questions, to peel back layers. This risotto, Victoria said, waving her fork like a conductor's baton. It uses saffron, yes, but not the Spanish variety. This is Iranian saffron, Persian. I believe so, ma'am. Emma kept her eyes on the water glass she was refilling, watching the level rise with focused intensity. You believe so? Victoria scoffed. A good server knows every ingredient. Tell me, child, do you have children? The question came out of nowhere, sharp and sudden as a slap. Mandow nearly dropped the pitcher. Water sloshed dangerously close to the rim. Excuse me? You have the hips of a mother, Victoria said bluntly, taking a sip of wine. And the patience, you treat me like a toddler who might throw a tantrum at any moment. Only a mother has that kind of patience. Emma forced a laugh that sounded brittle even to her own ears. I don't talk about my personal life at work, ma'am. A mistake, Victoria murmured, her dark eyes never leaving Emma's face. A woman's life is her history. If you hide it, people assume you're ashamed, or that you have something to hide. Mother, Dominic's voice cut through the air like a blade. Leave the girl alone. But his tone lacked conviction. He was still watching Emma with that intense, calculating stare, like she was a code he was trying to crack. What is your name again? Dominic leaned forward slightly, and Emma caught the scent of his cologne. Sandalwood and leather and money. Emma, sir. Emma. He tested the word in his mouth, rolling it around like wine he wasn't sure he liked. Emma Bennett? Yes, sir. Any relation to the Bennetts in Jersey? No, sir. No family in Jersey. Where is your family, then? Dominic pressed. And now he was fully engaged, his meal forgotten, his considerable attention focused entirely on her. Emma's throat went dry. They passed away, sir. It's just me. Just you, Victoria repeated softly. She looked at Emma's hands, at the ringless fingers gripping the water pitcher. No ring. So you're raising this theoretical child alone. Emma felt a flush of anger rise up her neck, hot and sharp. These people thought they owned the world. Thought they could dissect her life just because they'd bought an expensive bottle of wine and ordered the most expensive items on the menu. I didn't say I had a child, ma'am. Emma's voice firmed up, finding backbone she didn't know she still possessed. Is there anything else I can get you? Victoria smiled. It was a terrifying expression, all teeth and no warmth, like a shark that had just spotted blood in the water. Espresso, 2, and bring the check. Dominic is boring me tonight. Emma nodded and turned to leave, relief flooding through her. Almost done, just the coffee and the bill, and then they'd leave, and she could go home to Gabriel and pretend this night had never happened. That's when her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. Emma had forgotten to silence it. It was a strict violation of company policy, the kind of thing that could get her written up or worse. Panic flared in her chest, bright and sharp. She reached down to mute it through the fabric of her apron, fumbling for the button, but her hand was shaking too hard. The phone slipped from her pocket. Time stopped. Emma watched it fall in slow motion, tumbling end over end, the screen catching the light from the chandelier above. It hit the floor with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the elegant dining room, landing right next to Victoria's expensive Italian leather boots. Emma lunged for it, but Victoria was faster. For an old woman, she moved with the speed of a striking snake. She placed the rubber tip of her cane firmly on the phone, pinning it to the floor like a butterfly in a collector's case. Clumsy, Victoria tisked. She looked down at the screen. The lock screen was a high-definition photo, Emma's favorite picture in the world. Gabriel at the park 3 weeks ago, sitting on the swing set, his hair messy and windblown, his face split wide with laughter. The sun had been behind him, backlighting his curls like a halo. But it wasn't the hair that mattered. It wasn't the smile or the chubby toddler cheeks or the dinosaur shirt he'd insisted on wearing every day for a month. It was the eyes. Gabriel had heterochromia. One eye was a deep chocolate brown, inherited from Emma's side of the family. The other was a startling, impossible gray blue, like winter ice over deep water. The exact same shade of gray blue as Dominic Castellano's left eye. Emma froze, her hand hovering inches from the phone. She looked up and saw Victoria staring at the screen, her expression shifting from arrogance to shock to something much more dangerous. Calculation. Victoria lifted her gaze from the phone to Emma. Then she looked at Dominic, who was checking something on his own phone, oblivious to the drama unfolding at his feet. Victoria lifted her cane. Pick it up, she commanded softly. Emma snatched the phone like it was on fire, shoving it deep into her pocket. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. I'm so sorry, I have to go. Wait, Victoria's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a judge delivering a verdict. Dominic looked up from his phone, frowning. What is it? Victoria ignored her son. She kept her eyes pinned on Emma like a scientist studying a particularly interesting specimen. The boy in the picture, Victoria said. her voice deceptively light. He's yours? My nephew, Emma lied. The words came automatically, born of 3 years of practiced deception. He's my nephew. He has beautiful eyes, Victoria said. Very distinctive. Unusual. Dominic was staring at them now, confusion evident on his face. What are you talking about? Nothing, Dominic. Victoria never broke eye contact with Emma. Just admiring the genetics of the common folk. Go, child. Get the espresso. Emma fled. She ran to the kitchen, her heart pounding like a sledgehammer trying to break through her ribcage. She needed to leave. She needed to grab her bag, run out the back door, and never come back. They'd seen the eyes. Victoria had seen Gabriel's eyes. Else, Emma gasped, grabbing the manager's arm with desperate fingers. I can't. I feel sick. I have to go home, please. Are you insane? Hayes hissed, his face going from red to purple. They're ordering coffee. You finish the table or you don't get your paycheck. Do you hear me? Not one dime. Emma looked at the back door, at freedom, at safety, but she needed that paycheck. She needed the $340 for Gabriel's medication. If she ran now, she'd be destitute by Monday. Maybe Sophia didn't put it together, Emma thought desperately. Maybe she just thought it was a coincidence. Heterochromia was rare but not impossible. Stranger things had happened. Emma forced herself to breathe. Just drop the check. Get the tip. Leave. She prepared the espressos with shaking hands, watching the dark liquid pour into the small, white cups like her life was draining away drop by drop. She placed them on a tray, added the leather folder with the check, walked back out into the dining room on legs that felt like water. Dominic and Victoria had stopped talking the moment she'd left. Now they sat in charged silence, something unspoken hanging between them like smoke. As Emma approached, they both turned to watch her. She placed the cups down with exaggerated care. Your espresso! Victoria reached out and grabbed Emma's wrist. Her grip was iron strong, the fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Emma gasped, trying to pull away, but Victoria held fast. Stay, Victoria commanded. Dominic looked at his mother, confusion giving way to concern. Mother, what are you doing? Victoria ignored him. She pulled Emma closer, close enough that Emma could smell her perfume. Roses and old dust and something darker. Close enough to see the lines around her eyes, the hardness in her jaw, the absolute certainty in her expression. I know a lie when I hear one, Victoria whispered. Her voice was soft, meant only for Emma's ears. And I know those eyes. I saw them on my late husband. I see them on my son every single day. Emma tried to pull away, panic rising like bile in her throat. Please, you're hurting me. The waitress, Victoria said, turning to her son, her voice rising just enough to be heard clearly across the table, says the boy on her phone is her nephew. But she looks at you with fear, Dominic. Not the fear of a gangster, the fear of a ghost. Dominic stared at Emma, really stared, stripping away everything. The waitress uniform, the exhaustion, the 3 years of hiding. He looked at her face and imagined it in different circumstances. Imagined her in a silk gown. Imagined her with a mask covering her eyes. Isabel, he whispered. The name he'd known her by. The name she'd given him in the garden. The lies she'd told 3 years ago. Emma closed her eyes. My name is Emma. Show him the picture, Victoria commanded. No. Show him. Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. Dominic stood up. The movement was so sudden the table shook. Wine sloshed in glasses. The espresso cups rattled in their saucers. Everyone in the restaurant turned to look, conversations dying mid-sentence. Show me what? Dominic's voice was low and terrifying, the kind of voice that preceded violence. The boy, Victoria said, releasing Emma's wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling back. Show him your son, Emma. Show him the child you've been hiding for 3 years. Emma stood paralyzed. The entire restaurant was watching now. Mr. Hayes near the kitchen door, wringing his hands. The other diners pretending not to stare while staring. The security guards by the entrance, hands hovering near their weapons. Emma stammered. What did you say to her? Dominic looked at his mother, his jaw tight, the muscles in his neck standing out like cords. What the hell did you say to her? Victoria leaned back in her chair, a cruel smile playing on her lips. She was enjoying this, Emma realized with horror, enjoying the destruction she was causing. I asked her about the fun, Victoria said. She paused for dramatic effect, her dark eyes glittering. And she told me a lie. But then I asked her something else, something very specific. What? Dominic's voice was a growl now. Victoria looked straight at her son. I asked her the boy's birth date. Another pause. And do you know what she told me? Dominic looked at Emma. His face had gone pale, the color draining from his cheeks like someone had opened a valve. What? He rasped. She said, Victoria continued, each word dropped like a stone into still water, that he was born on October 14th. Emma watched Dominic's face drain of blood, watched him stagger back slightly, his hand gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white, watched the math happening behind his eyes. October 14th, 9 months. 9 months to the day after the masquerade ball. 9 months after the only night he'd ever allowed himself to be vulnerable. 9 months after the woman who'd vanished from his bed without a trace. The woman he'd sent men to find. The woman who'd haunted him for 3 years. The silence at the table was deafening. Dominic looked at Emma. His eyes were wide, searching her face for the truth he already knew. For the answer that was written in the features of the boy on her phone. For the confirmation that would change everything. Is it true? His voice was no longer a smooth baritone. It was jagged, torn open, and broken. Is he mine? And Emma, who had spent 3 years building walls, who had lied and hidden and run, who had sacrificed everything to keep her son safe, found that she had no more lies left to tell. She said nothing, which was answer enough. The world didn't end all at once. It ended in slow motion, piece by piece, like a building collapsing from the inside out. Dominic stared at Emma with eyes that had turned from ice to something molten, something dangerous. His chest rose and fell with controlled breaths, the kind of breathing a man does when he's trying very hard not to explode. Around them, the silver rose had gone silent. Every diner, every server, every person in the restaurant was frozen, watching the drama unfold at table 7 like it was theater. Is he mine? Dominic repeated each word separately, giving them weight, making them weapons. Emma couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up entirely. She stood there, trembling, the espresso tray still clutched in her white-knuckled hands, unable to confirm and unable to deny. Victoria saved her from answering. Don't be dense, Dominic. The matriarch's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. Look at her. Look at how she looks at you. That's not the face of a woman lying. That's the face of a woman who's been caught. Dominic's jaw clenched so hard Emma heard his teeth grind together. He took a step toward her, and Emma took an instinctive step back. The tray tilted in her hands. An espresso cup slid, teetered, fell. It shattered on the floor between them, dark liquid spreading across the white tiles like blood. No one moved to clean it up. 3 years, Dominic said. His voice was quiet now, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. You stole 3 years from me. I didn't steal anything. The words burst out of Emma, desperate and raw. I protected him. From you, from this. She gestured wildly at the restaurant, at the guards by the door, at the world he represented. From a life where people get killed over phone calls. Dominic flinched like she'd slapped him. You think you can protect him better than I can? You're waiting tables for scraps while my son lives in God knows what conditions. He's happy. Emma's voice rose, maternal instinct overriding fear. He's safe. He doesn't know what gunshots sound like. He doesn't have nightmares about men in suits coming to take his mother away. That's a better life. A naive life, Victoria interjected coolly. She was still seated, still sipping her wine like she was watching a mildly interesting play. And now a dangerous one. If I saw it, girl, others will see it. You've been careless. Dominic ignored his mother. His entire focus was on Emma, burning into her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Where is he? Emma sealed her lips. She would die before she told him. She would let them drag her out of here in handcuffs before she gave them Mrs. Gable's address. Where is my son, Isabel? He moved fast, faster than she thought possible for a man his size. One moment he was standing by the table. The next, his hands were on her upper arms, gripping her, not painfully but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away. The touch sent electricity through her, unwanted memories flooding back. Those hands gentle on her skin, those hands in her hair, those hands that had held her like she was precious. My name is Emma, she said through gritted teeth, and you'll never find him. I have contingencies. If I don't call in an hour, he gets moved. It was a desperate bluff. Her only contingency was 70-year-old Mrs. Gable, whose idea of security was making sure the deadbolt was locked. Dominic laughed. It was a harsh sound, barking and void of humor, echoing through the silent restaurant. You think you can outmaneuver the Castellano family in Chicago? His face was inches from hers now. She could see the gray-blue of his left eye up close, could see the brown of his right, could see the rage and the hurt and something else swimming in their depths. I'll find him before the hour is up. And when I do, we're all going home. No, Emma struggled against his grip, useless as fighting a steel trap. I won't go back. I won't let him grow up like you. You have no choice. Dominic's voice dropped to something primal, something possessive. You made your choice the night you slept with me and ran away. You are mine. He is mine. And nobody walks away from me twice. He turned his head, snapping his fingers at the bodyguards by the entrance. The sound was like a gunshot. Marcus, Tony, bring the car around back. Clear the kitchen. Mr. Castellano, please. Mr. Hayes had finally found his spine, waddling over with his hands raised in supplication. This is highly irregular. You can't just take my staff during a shift. The customers are staring. Dominic didn't even look at the manager. He just lifted one hand in a dismissive gesture. Marcus, the larger bodyguard, stepped forward and shoved Hayes hard in the chest. The manager stumbled backward into a waiter's station, sending silverware crashing to the floor in a cacophony of metal on tile. The restaurant is closed, Dominic announced to the room, his voice booming with authority. Everyone out, now, your meals are on the house. Pandemonium erupted. Chairs scraped, people grabbed coats and purses, scrambling for the exits. Murmurs of fear rippled through the crowd. Nobody argued. Nobody called the police. Nobody did anything except flee, because when Dominic Castellano said a place was closed, it was closed. Dominic kept his grip on Emma's arm, dragging her toward the kitchen doors. She dug her heels in, her shoes slipping on the slick floor, but it was like trying to stop a train. He was an unstoppable force, and she was nothing but an obstacle to be moved. Victoria, let's go, Dominic called over his shoulder. His mother stood slowly, adjusting her shawl with deliberate care. She picked up her cane, tested its weight, then walked past the overturned station where Mr. Hayes sat among the scattered forks and knives, looking like his world had just ended. As she passed him, Victoria dropped a $100 bill onto his chest. For the breakage, she said dryly. She followed her son into the kitchen, her cane tapping rhythmically on the tile, leaving Case and silence in her wake. The kitchen of the Silver Rose was all stainless steel and steam, industrial fans, and the smell of garlic and roasted meat. The kitchen staff took one look at Dominic's face and fled out the side exit without a word. Pots were abandoned on burners, half-plated dishes left on the pass. Within 30 seconds, the kitchen was empty except for Emma, Dominic, Victoria, and the two bodyguards. Emma was sobbing openly now, her resistance fading into sheer terror. Dominic, please don't do this. He's just a baby. He needs his mother, not this. Dominic stopped near the grease traps, spinning her around to face him. The fluorescent kitchen lights were harsh, highlighting the tears streaking her makeup and the raw fury in his eyes. He needs his father, Dominic retorted. He needs his legacy. Did you think you could hide a Castellano heir forever? Did you think blood wouldn't call to blood? I don't want your legacy, Emma cried. Your legacy is blood and prison and death. My legacy is power. Dominic's voice was hard as stone. It's safety, something you clearly cannot provide if you're working double shifts in this dump while strangers watch my son. He let go of her arms, but only to cup her face in his hands. The gesture was confusingly tender for a man who was essentially kidnapping her. His thumbs wiped away her tears, and for just a moment, the granite facade cracked. Emma saw something underneath, something raw and wounded. Why did you run, Isabel? The question came out rough, full of unresolved pain. That morning I woke up and the bed was cold. You left no note, nothing. Just gone. His jaw worked. I looked for you. For months I had every resource at my disposal searching for a woman named Isabel who worked for that catering company. But you gave them a fake name, didn't you? And when they went bankrupt, any trail went with them. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, fresh tears leaking out. I heard you on the phone while you were in the shower. I heard you ordering someone killed, like you were ordering a pizza. She opened her eyes, looked at him directly. I realized the man in the mask wasn't real. The monster was real. Dominic flinched. His hands dropped from her face and the tenderness vanished, replaced by icy resolve. The monster keeps the city running, he said coldly. The monster keeps his family safe. You should have trusted me. The back door of the kitchen banged open. Marcus stuck his head in, and Emma saw he was holding a submachine gun underneath his open suit jacket. Boss, car's ready, but we got a situation. Dominic's entire demeanor shifted in an instant, from jilted lover to mafia boss in the space of a heartbeat. What is it? Two SUVs parked across the alley, blacked out windows, been idling there since we went inside. Marcus's voice was professionally calm, but Emma heard the edge of concern. Looks like Valentino soldiers. They must have been tailing us. Victoria tapped her cane on the oily floor tiles, the sound sharp and disapproving. The Valentinos. I told you, Dominic. The smell of weakness draws the wolves. We've been inside too long. Emma's blood ran cold. The Valentinos. She'd seen the name in newspapers, always in connection with violence. Car bombs, bodies in the Chicago River. A war between families that had been raging for years, leaving corpses in its wake. They don't know about the boy yet, Dominic said, his mind working furiously behind his eyes. They're just taking a shot at me. He turned to Emma, and his expression was deadly serious. Stay close to me. Do exactly what I say. If I tell you to get down, you drop. Do you understand? Emma nodded mutely. The abstract fear of Dominic taking Gabriel was suddenly replaced by the very immediate fear of dying in a dirty alley behind a restaurant. Marcus, take point. Tony, rear guard. Mother, stay between Tony and the girl. Move. They burst out into the cold Chicago night. The rain had stopped, but the alley was still slick with water, puddles reflecting the yellow streetlights like scattered coins. The Cadillac Escalade sat 10 feet away, massive and black and armored, its engine rumbling, rear door hanging open like a mouth. They were 5 feet from the car and the night exploded. Tires screeched at the end of the alley. The sunroofs on the two parked SUVs popped open in unison. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like demonic strobe lights, bright and terrible. The sound was deafening. Not like movies. Louder, more physical. Emma felt it in her chest, in her bones, in her teeth. Bullets sparked against the brick wall above their heads, slammed into the armored plating of the Escalade with sounds like hammers on anvils. Down, Dominic roared. He didn't just tell her, he tackled her. Dominic threw his entire weight over Emma, slamming her onto the wet pavement. The breath was knocked out of her lungs, her face pressed against gritty asphalt that smelled like oil and rain. Above her, Dominic was a human fortress, his body covering hers completely, shielding her from the bullets that were chewing up the world around them. Emma screamed, a sound lost in the thunder of gunfire. She felt a sickening thud against Dominic's back, felt his body jerk with the impact. A bullet had hit him, but it didn't penetrate. He was wearing a vest under that expensive suit, Kevlar that stopped the round but didn't stop the force. It was like being hit with a sledgehammer. Dominic grunted, a sharp intake of breath, but he didn't move off her, didn't flinch, didn't do anything except keep her covered. Marcus and Tony were returning fire. Their weapons roared, sending a hail of bullets toward the attacking SUVs. Emma heard a scream, high and cut short. One of the Valentino gunmen falling back through a sunroof. Mother, get in the car, Dominic yelled over the gunfire. Victoria Castellano had not fallen. Incredibly, she was crouched behind a dumpster, her black dress pooling around her, cane in one hand and a small pearl-handled revolver in the other. She fired calmly toward the attackers, each shot measured and deliberate. At Dominic's command, she moved with surprising speed, scuttling toward the Escalade. Dominic hauled Emma to her feet. Run! They sprinted the last few feet. Dominic shoved Emma into the back seat, virtually throwing her on top of Victoria. Emma landed in a tangle of limbs and expensive fabric, gasping. Dominic dove in after them as another volley of bullets chewed up the pavement where they'd been standing a second before. Marcus jumped into the driver's seat. Tony dove into the passenger side, still firing out the window. Go, 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 Dominic bellowed. The Escalade roared to life. Marcus slammed it into reverse, and they smashed into one of the Valentino SUVs with a bone-jarring crunch of metal on metal. The impact spun the enemy vehicle out of the way. Marcus threw the Escalade into drive and tore down the alley, sparks flying as they scraped against brick walls on both sides. They burst out onto the main street, tires smoking, weaving through shocked traffic. Horns blared, people scattered. Marcus drove like a man possessed, taking corners too fast, running red lights, putting distance between them and the ambush. Inside the car, there was heavy breathing and the smell of cordite and fear. Emma was trembling uncontrollably, pressed against the rich leather seats, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Dominic sat up, shrugging off his suit jacket to inspect his shoulder. There was already a massive bruise forming where the slug had impacted the vest, angry purple spreading across his skin. He caught her looking, His eyes were wild with adrenaline, pupils dilated, chest heaving. See? His breath came hard. This is the world outside my protection. You were a sitting duck out there, Isabel. You and my son. Without me, you're targets. Easy targets. Emma couldn't argue. The terror of the last 60 seconds had shattered her reality completely. She'd spent 3 years pretending that the violence of his world was a distant abstraction, something that happened to other people. Now she'd tasted copper in her mouth from biting her tongue, felt the concussive force of gunfire in her chest, smelled the acrid smoke of weapons being fired at close range. It was real. All of it was real. Where are we going? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Dominic looked out the window as the city lights blurred past. They were heading north, away from the restaurant district, toward the wealthy suburbs where houses had names instead of numbers and walls instead of fences. Home, Dominic said grimly. We're going home to get ready. Tonight was just the beginning. He pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up his face in the darkness of the car. Give me the address. We're picking up my son. The convoy of 3 armored SUVs moved through South Chicago like sharks through shallow water. Dominic's damaged Escalade had rendezvoused with 2 more vehicles under the cover of a highway overpass, and now they rolled together, a motorcade of money and violence. Emma sat in the back of the lead vehicle, her hands clenched so tightly together that her knuckles had gone white. Beside her, Dominic was silent. The adrenaline from the shootout had faded, replaced by a grim, stony tension that made the air in the car feel thick. He stared out the window at the neighborhood sliding past. South Chicago, the forgotten part of the city where streetlights flickered and died, where potholes big enough to swallow tires dotted the roads, where police sirens were as common as birdsong and nobody called them for help anyway. This is where you've been? Dominic's voice was low, not an accusation. Disbelief. You left a penthouse for this? Emma hadn't known he had a penthouse, hadn't known anything about his real life. But looking at him now, at the custom suit and the gold cufflinks and the watch that probably cost more than a car, she should have guessed. I bought freedom, Emma whispered. It was expensive. The car screeched to a halt in front of a peeling beige duplex with a chain-link fence that leaned drunkenly to one side. The yard was mostly dirt. A rusty swing set sat in the corner, one swing missing its seat. This was Mrs. Gable's house. This was where Emma had left the most precious thing in her world. Stay in the car, Mother, Dominic said. Victoria nodded, her eyes scanning the dark street like a radar system. Emma noticed she still had the pearl-handled revolver in her lap. Dominic and Emma stepped out, immediately surrounded by a ring of bodyguards. Marcus kicked open the chain-link gate, the metal screaming in protest. Emma ran up the cracked concrete steps and banged on the door. Mrs. Gable, it's me, it's Emma. The door cracked open, revealing a terrified elderly woman in a floral nightgown, her white hair in curlers. She looked from Emma to the blood on Emma's shirt from where she'd pressed against the wet alley floor, then to the looming shadow of Dominic behind her, and the armed men fanning out across her tiny yard. Emma! Mrs. Gable's voice was high and frightened. Oh, Lord, child, what have you done? I need Gabriel. Emma pushed past her into the living room that smelled of lavender and old dust and the vegetable soup Mrs. Gable made every Thursday. We have to go now. He's asleep. Mrs. Gable was wringing her hands, blocking the hallway to the bedrooms. Who are these men? You can't just barge in here and... Dominic stepped into the light of the hallway. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The authority radiating off him was palpable, physical, a pressure that filled the small house. Mrs. Gable shrank back instinctively, recognizing on some primal level that she was in the presence of an apex predator. We are the boy's family, Dominic said. His voice was surprisingly gentle, the same voice he'd used when they met in the garden 3 years ago. We're taking him home. Emma didn't wait for permission. She ran down the hallway to the back bedroom. It was tiny, barely big enough for the crib and a single dresser with 3 drawers that stuck. In the crib, curled up under a blanket printed with cartoon rockets, was Gabriel. He was sleeping soundly, his thumb near his mouth, a habit Emma had been trying to break for 6 months. His dark curls were messy against the pillow. His face was peaceful, innocent, completely unaware that his world was about to change forever. Emma reached down to pick him up, but a large hand stopped her. Let me, Dominic said. Emma froze. He doesn't know you. If he wakes up, he'll scream. He is my blood. Dominic's voice was quiet but certain. He will know. Dominic leaned over the crib, and Emma watched something transform in his face. The hardness melted, the cold calculation disappeared. What replaced it was wonder, raw and unguarded. For a man who'd just fired a weapon and survived an assassination attempt, his movements were impossibly tender. He slid his hands under the sleeping toddler with the care of someone handling the most precious thing in the world. As he lifted Gabriel, the light from the hallway hit the boy's face. Dominic's breath hitched audibly. Seeing the photo had been one thing, an image on a screen, easily dismissed as coincidence or trick of light. But holding the weight of his son in his arms was something else entirely. Gabriel was real, solid, warm. His chest rose and fell with each breath. His small hand curled reflexively against Dominic's shirt. The boy shifted in his sleep, scrunching his nose in a gesture that was pure Emma. He let out a soft sigh and rested his head against Dominic's chest, right over his heart. Dominic looked up at Emma. His eyes were shining, and in that moment, Emma saw the man from the garden again. Not the monster, not the mafia boss, just a man holding his child for the first time, overwhelmed by the magnitude of it. "He's too light," Dominic murmured. "He's too small for 3 years old." Emma felt a fresh wave of shame crash over her. "He's a picky eater." It was true, but it was also a lie. Gabriel ate what she could afford to buy. Fresh fruit was expensive. Organic chicken was a luxury. Sometimes at the end of the month when money was tight, dinner was pasta and butter. Nothing else. "That changes tonight," Dominic declared. It wasn't a promise, it was a fact. He turned and walked out of the room, carrying Gabriel like a holy relic. Emma followed, her heart breaking and reforming into something new, something she didn't have a name for yet. They moved back toward the cars. As Dominic stepped onto the sidewalk, a sudden commotion erupted down the block. A car engine roared. Headlights swept over them, bright and blinding. "Contact front!" Marcus shouted, raising his rifle. But it wasn't an attack. It was a police cruiser, its lights flashing red and blue in the darkness. An officer stepped out, young and scared, hand hovering near his holster. "Hey, what's going on here? We got reports of—" The officer stopped. He saw the armored SUVs. He saw the men in suits with military-grade weapons. He saw Dominic Castellano standing in the streetlight, holding a sleeping child. The color drained from the officer's face. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. Everyone in Chicago knew Dominic Castellano. Everyone knew what happened to people who got in his way. "Get back in your car, officer," Marcus said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The officer hesitated for maybe 2 seconds. His hand moved away from his gun. He looked at Dominic, at the child, at the situation he absolutely did not want to be part of. Then he got back into his cruiser, turned off his lights, and reversed away into the darkness. "You own the police too?" Emma asked, her voice hollow, as she climbed back into the SUV. "I own the silence," Dominic corrected. He was settling Gabriel carefully onto his lap, adjusting the boy's position so his head rested in the crook of Dominic's arm. "And now I own the future." He looked down at Gabriel, then at Emma. His expression was fierce, possessive, absolute. "You will never struggle again, Isabel. But you will never leave these walls again, either. You belong to the family now. You understand? You're mine. He's mine. We're all going home." Emma looked at her son, sleeping peacefully in the arms of a monster. A monster who'd just shielded her body with his own. A monster who'd held his child for the first time with a gentleness that made her chest ache. She realized with a sinking heart that she hadn't just been kidnapped. She'd been annexed. The city rolled past the windows as they drove north, away from the broken streetlights and toward the pristine walls of the Castellano estate. Emma pressed her hand against the cold glass, watching her old life disappear behind them. There was no going back now. The Castellano estate was not a house. It was a fortress disguised as a palace. They drove through gates of wrought iron 15 feet tall, topped with spikes that weren't decorative. The family crest was worked into the metal, all elaborate scrollwork and Latin phrases Emma couldn't read. The gates swung open silently, operated by guards in a booth who spoke into radios as the convoy passed. The driveway wound through gardens that were perfectly manicured even in February. Trees stood in precise rows, their bare branches like skeletal hands reaching for the night sky. Marble statues dotted the landscape, pale and ghostly in the floodlights. A fountain dominated the circular drive in front of the main house, water still flowing despite the cold, topped with a bronze Poseidon that had to be 12 feet tall. The house itself rose 3 stories, all cream-colored stone and tall windows that glowed with warm light from within. Italian Renaissance architecture, Emma thought. though she knew nothing about architecture. It just looked old and European and impossibly expensive. Columns flanked the entrance. Balconies jutted from the second floor. The roof was terracotta tile that probably cost more per square foot than Emma's entire apartment. This was where Gabriel would grow up, behind 12-foot walls topped with electrified wire and motion sensors. In a house with 40 rooms that Emma couldn't begin to imagine filling, with armed guards and security cameras and the kind of wealth that made her 3 years of struggle feel like a bad joke. Gabriel woke as the car stopped. He blinked sleepily, confused, looking around at the unfamiliar surroundings. Then he saw Emma and reached for her. "Mama?" Dominic handed him over, and Emma clutched her son to her chest, breathing in the smell of him. Baby shampoo and sleep and home. Victoria exited the car first, surveying Emma with a critical eye that took in her ruined clothes, her tear-streaked face, her defensive posture. "The West Wing is prepared," Victoria said. Her voice was brisk, businesslike. "The boy will have the nursery suite. You will have the adjoining room." "I'm not a prisoner," Emma started to say. Victoria cut her off. "No, your family, there's a difference, but her tone suggested that the difference was academic at best. Staff appeared as if summoned by magic. 2 maids in black uniforms, a butler who looked like he'd stepped out of a period drama, and a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and competent hands, who approached Gabriel with a warm smile. "I'm Rosa," she said. "I'll be helping with the little one." Gabriel clung to Emma, whimpering. He didn't like strangers, didn't trust easily. "He'll adjust," Victoria said dismissively. "Children always do. Show them to their rooms." Emma followed Rosa into the house, carrying Gabriel, feeling like she was walking through a museum. The foyer alone was bigger than her apartment, black and white marble floors in a checkerboard pattern, a chandelier that had to weigh a ton, all crystal and gold, a staircase that curved up and split into 2 directions, the banister carved wood that gleamed under the lights. The West Wing was a maze of hallways and doors. Rosa opened one, revealing what she'd called the nursery suite. Emma nearly laughed. It wasn't a nursery, it was a child's fantasy. The room was huge, with murals of Italian countryside painted on the walls, rolling hills and cypress trees, and a blue sky that seemed to go on forever. A custom crib that looked like it belonged in a palace, a rocking chair upholstered in soft blue fabric, shelves lined with books and toys, more toys than one child could play with in a year. "The bathroom is through there," Rosa said, pointing. "Your room is next door. There's a connecting door here, see? So you can hear him if he wakes." Emma's room was simpler, but no less luxurious. A 4-poster bed with actual silk sheets, a wardrobe that probably cost more than a car, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. "I'll leave you to get settled," Rosa said gently. "If you need anything, just press this button. Someone will come." She left, closing the door quietly behind her. Emma stood in the middle of the room, still holding Gabriel, and felt the weight of everything crash down on her. She sank onto the bed and finally let herself cry. Not the desperate, terrified tears from the restaurant. These were different, exhausted, grieving. The tears of someone who'd lost a war they'd been fighting for 3 years. Gabriel patted her face with his small hand. "Mama sad?" "Mama's okay, baby." Emma kissed his forehead. "We're going to be okay." She didn't know if it was true, but she had to believe it. 3 days later, Emma understood that okay was relative. Life inside the Castellano estate was a jarring mix of extreme luxury and suffocating tension. Gabriel at least had adapted with the resilience of the very young. He spent his days in the playroom, a space on the first floor that had been converted into a toddler's paradise. Climbing structures, art supplies, a play kitchen that was nicer than most real kitchens, every toy imaginable. A personal chef made him meals tailored to his tastes. Dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets from organic free-range birds, fresh fruit cut into fun shapes, mac and cheese made with imported Italian pasta. Gabriel was eating better than he ever had in his life, and Emma hated that she was grateful for it. But what disturbed her most was watching from her window as Dominic spent time with their son. Every afternoon, she'd see them in the garden. Dominic would kneel on the grass in his expensive suits, helping Gabriel stack oversized wooden blocks or push a toy truck along the stone paths. He was patient in a way Emma hadn't imagined possible. When Gabriel knocked over a tower they'd spent 10 minutes building, Dominic just laughed and said, "Let's make it taller this time." Gabriel adored him, called him Papa after just 2 days, the word rolling off his tongue like he'd been saying it his whole life. Emma didn't know how to feel about that. On the 3rd day, Victoria summoned her to a sitting room on the 2nd floor. It was all antique furniture and oil paintings of stern-looking men who were probably dead Castellanos. Victoria sat in a wingback chair like it was a throne, her cane resting against the armrest. "Sit," Victoria commanded. Emma sat. "We need to discuss the arrangement." Emma crossed her arms defensively. "I'm not signing anything. I'm not giving up custody." Victoria looked at her like she was an idiot. "Don't be stupid. Nobody is taking the boy from you. A boy needs his mother, but a king needs a queen." Emma froze. "What?" Victoria's smile was thin and calculating. "The Valentinos attacked us because they thought Dominic was weak, distracted. A bachelor Don is a vulnerability. He has no heir apparent, no succession plan. It makes him a target." She leaned forward slightly. "But a family man, a father with a son and a wife, that project's stability, strength, immortality, the family continuing through generations." Emma's heart was pounding. "You want me to marry him?" "It's not about what I want." Victoria's voice was matter of fact. "It's about what's necessary. You will marry Dominic next week. There will be a ceremony. You will become a Castellano legally, with all the protections and obligations that entails." "I won't." Emma stood up shaking. "I don't love him. I'm terrified of him." "Love comes later," Victoria said dismissively. "Or it doesn't. It doesn't matter. What matters is respect, loyalty. You have the heir. You're the mother of the next Castellano Don. You cannot be a waitress anymore. You must be a wife." "And if I refuse?" Victoria's expression went cold. "Then you remain a guest. And guests, dear girl, have no legal rights to the children of the house. If you want to say in Gabriel's life, if you want to protect him from the darker aspects of this business, you need the ring. You need the status. You need my son's name." The choice wasn't really a choice at all. That evening, dinner was served in the formal dining room. The table could seat 20, but it was just the three of them. Dominic at one end, Victoria at the other, Emma in the middle, feeling like she was at a negotiation between kingdoms. Gabriel had been put to bed by Rosa. Emma had read him 3 stories, sung him 2 songs, stayed until he fell asleep. When she'd left his room, she'd pressed her forehead against the door and reminded herself why she was doing this. For him. Everything for him. Dominic cut into his steak with precise movements. He hadn't looked at Emma since she sat down. "Mother tells me she spoke to you," he said. Emma stared at her plate. The food was incredible. Some kind of herb-crusted lamb with roasted vegetables that probably had French names. She hadn't touched it. "She told me you want a prop for a wedding photo." Dominic stopped eating. He set down his knife and fork, wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, and finally looked at her. "I want my son to have his mother, and I want my enemies to know that the Castellano line is secure." His voice was steady, reasonable. "The Valentinos are regrouping. They know about Gabriel now. We found the leak. Someone in the kitchen at the Silver Rose sold the information. He's been dealt with." Emma lost what little appetite she'd had. "They know about him, which means you and Gabriel are now the 2 most targeted people in Chicago. Marriage gives you my name. My name is a shield." "It's a target," Emma countered. "It's both," Dominic admitted. He stood up, walking around the table to her end. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside sat a ring that took Emma's breath away. The diamond was enormous, surrounded by blood-red rubies that caught the candlelight and glowed like embers. "This was my grandmother's," Dominic said. "It has never left the family." He knelt beside her chair, not in front of it, not on one knee like a romantic proposal. Beside it, so they were at eye level. It was somehow more intimate. "Isabel," he said, using the name she'd given him, "marry me, not for love, but for him. Help me build a fortress he can't fall out of." Emma looked at the ring, at this man who terrified her, at the garden outside where Gabriel had laughed today while playing with his father, at the gold-plated cage she was already trapped in. She thought of the cold apartment, the constant fear, the bills and the struggle, and the nights she'd cried because she didn't know how she'd make it through another month. Slowly, Emma extended her hand. "For Gabriel," she whispered. "For Gabriel," Dominic agreed. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his mouth lingering on her skin. Suddenly, the lights in the dining room flickered. Then they went out completely. The darkness lasted only a second before the emergency lighting kicked on, bathing everything in a sinister red glow. "Mother," Dominic said, his voice sharp. "I know," Victoria replied from the other end of the table. The heavy oak doors burst open. Marcus stumbled in, blood pouring from a gash on his forehead, his suit jacket torn. "Breach!" Marcus screamed, raising his weapon. "West wall! They're inside the perimeter!" Gunfire erupted somewhere above them. Glass shattered. Alarms began to wail. "It's the Valentinos!" Marcus shouted over the noise. "They have a team inside the house." Emma was already running, her chair crashing backward. Only one thought filled her mind, drowning out everything else. Gabriel. Emma didn't think. She ran. The grand foyer had become a war zone. Red emergency lights cast everything in hellish shadows. Men in black tactical gear were rappelling down from the skylight 3 stories above, their boots hitting marble with heavy thuds. The chandeliers swayed dangerously, crystal pendants chiming like death bells. Dominic was right behind her, shouting into his earpiece. "All units to the West Wing. Protect the child! I repeat, protect the child!" Gunfire erupted from the second-floor balcony. Emma heard the distinctive crack of bullets hitting stone, saw marble chips explode from a column inches from her head. She didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Gabriel was upstairs, alone except for Rosa, and these men were here to kill him, to cut the Castellano bloodline, to send a message written in her baby's blood. "Cover fire!" Dominic bellowed. "Now!" Castellano guards poured in from the east wing, returning fire. The foyer became a kill box, bullets flying in every direction. Emma ducked behind a marble pillar, her hands pressed over her ears, the sound physically painful. A body tumbled from the balcony, hitting the floor with a sickening crunch 20 feet away. Dominic slid in beside her, his weapon drawn. He fired 2 controlled shots toward the balcony, then grabbed her arm. "When I say run, I say run, you run. Don't look back. Don't stop. Just get to Gabriel." "I won't leave without him," Emma said. Her voice didn't shake. The terror had burned through into something else, something cold and focused and absolutely certain. "That's the plan," Dominic said. His eyes met hers, and she saw something in them she'd never seen before. Respect. "Run!" They sprinted up the grand staircase, Dominic firing as they climbed. A man in tactical gear appeared at the top of the stairs. Dominic put 2 rounds in his chest before Emma even registered the threat. The man fell backward, his weapon clattering down the steps. They reached the second floor and ran down the corridor toward the West Wing. Emma's lungs were burning. Her legs felt like rubber. Behind them, she could hear Victoria's voice, surprisingly calm, directing the guards like a general commanding troops. The door to Gabriel's nursery suite was open. Emma's heart stopped. The door was open. She'd closed it. She always closed it. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." She burst into the room. Rosa was on the floor near the rocking chair, unconscious but breathing. A nasty bruise was forming on her temple where someone had struck her. The crib was empty. The cartoon rocket blanket lay crumpled on the floor. The balcony doors were shattered, glass scattered across the carpet like diamonds. Emma ran to the balcony and looked out into the darkness. Her scream was raw, primal, the sound of a mother who'd just seen her worst nightmare made real. A man in black combat gear stood on the balcony, 20 feet away, near the railing. He was holding Gabriel under one arm like a package. The boy was awake now, crying, reaching out with his small hands toward Emma. "Mama!" Gabriel's voice was high and terrified. "Mama!" The man was attaching something to the railing, a zip line. He was going to rappel down into the gardens where a vehicle was almost certainly waiting. Julian Valentino turned around, and Emma saw his face in the security lights from the garden below. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of pretty boy looks that belonged on a movie screen, not holding a gun to a toddler's head. Because that's what he was doing now. The pistol was pressed against Gabriel's temple, and Gabriel was sobbing, his little body shaking with fear. "Let him go," Emma screamed, stepping forward onto the balcony. Julian spun toward her, adjusting his grip so the gun's barrel was more firmly against Gabriel's head. "Drop the weapon, Castellano, or the kid's brains paint the wall." Dominic had come up behind Emma, his pistol raised. Emma could see his hand was steady, his breathing controlled. He had a shot, but it was risky. If he missed by even an inch, if Julian flinched at the wrong moment, Gabriel would die. "This is between us, Julian," Dominic said. His voice was surprisingly calm. "Put the boy down. I'll go with you. You want leverage? Take me." Julian laughed, sharp and brittle. "I don't want you, old man. I want your heart." He shook Gabriel, making the boy cry harder. "And this? This is your heart. I take this. I take everything from you, just like you took everything from my family." Emma scanned the balcony with desperate eyes. She was unarmed. She was nobody. Just a waitress who'd stumbled into a world of violence. But she was also a mother, and mothers could do impossible things when their children were in danger. Her eyes landed on the dresser just inside the room. On top of it sat a bronze statue of a horse, maybe 18 inches tall, heavy and solid. It was a decorative piece, probably worth thousands, the kind of thing rich people displayed because they could. Dominic, please. Emma let her voice break, let herself sag like she was collapsing. She sank to her knees, hands raised in supplication, drawing Julian's attention. Don't let him hurt my baby. Please, I'll do anything. Pathetic, Julian spat, his eyes flicking to Emma for just a second. Is this what the great Castellano chose? A weak little... That second was all they needed. Dominic's eyes met Emma's. A silent communication passed between them. An understanding? He gave the slightest nod. Do it. Emma didn't collapse. She lunged. She grabbed the bronze horse statue with both hands, feeling its weight, and in one fluid motion, she hurled it. Not at Julian. At the glass pane of the balcony door that was still hanging loosely in its frame above his head, cracked from when he'd broken through but not completely shattered. The bronze horse hit the glass with tremendous force. The pane exploded. A massive shard, as long as Emma's arm and shaped like a guillotine blade, fell directly onto Julian's right arm, the arm holding the gun. Julian howled. The sound was inhuman, full of shock and pain. The gun fell from his nerveless fingers, clattering onto the balcony floor. Dominic moved like lightning given human form. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, his shoulder slamming into Julian's chest with the force of a battering ram. The impact drove Julian backward into the railing. Julian's left arm was still wrapped around Gabriel, and as Julian went over the railing, he took the boy with him. Gabriel! Emma's scream tore through the night. Dominic lunged over the railing, his hands shooting out, fingers closing around the fabric of Gabriel's pajama shirt just as Julian fell. The man plummeted 2 stories down, landing with a terrible wet crunch in the stone fountain below. The water turned red around his motionless body. Dominic was hanging over the railing, all his weight pitched forward, one hand gripping the iron balustrade, the other holding Gabriel's pajama shirt. Gabriel dangled in the air, his weight pulling Dominic further over the edge. The muscles in Dominic's arms stood out like steel cables, trembling with effort. Emma threw herself at the railing, reaching down, grabbing Gabriel's arm. Together, she and Dominic hauled the boy up and over, collapsing backward onto the balcony floor in a tangle of limbs. Gabriel was screaming, his face red and wet with tears, but he was alive. He was whole. Emma crushed him against her chest, feeling his heart beating against hers, his small hands clutching fistfuls of her shirt. I've got you, Dominic was saying, his voice rough. He'd pulled them both against him, one arm around Emma, one around Gabriel, his body curved protectively over both of them. I've got you. Papa is here. Papa's here. The gunfire below had stopped. Emma could hear Marcus's voice echoing through the house. Estate is clear, boss. 6 hostiles down, 2 captured. Julian Valentino is alive, but... A pause. He's not going to walk again. Dominic didn't move. He stayed there on the balcony floor holding his family, his chest heaving with each breath. When he finally looked at Emma, his face was bloodied from flying glass, his shirt torn, but his eyes were clear. You saved us, he said. You threw the statue. Emma managed a tearful laugh. I missed. I was aiming for his head. No. Dominic reached out with one hand, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek with surprising gentleness. You didn't miss. Marcus appeared in the doorway, weapon lowered, surveying the damage. Behind him, Victoria Castellanos stepped into view. Her black dress was torn, there was a smudge of gunpowder residue on her cheek, but she was holding her pearl-handled revolver like a queen holding a scepter. She looked at the scene on the balcony, at Dominic holding Emma and Gabriel, at the broken glass and the blood and the evidence of violence. And she smiled. A real smile, not the cold calculation Emma had seen before. Well, Victoria said, it appears we chose correctly after all. She turned to Marcus. See to the wounded. Call our contacts at the police department. Make sure the story is self-defense. She looked back at Emma. And someone find this girl a proper dress. We have a wedding to plan. Spring came to Chicago with reluctant warmth. The gardens of the Castellano estate erupted into color. Roses blooming along the stone walls, cherry trees dropping pink petals like snow. Emma stood at the window of what was now her bedroom, the master suite she shared with Dominic, watching Gabriel play below. He was bigger now, his face less babyish, more boy. He ran through the garden with a toy sword, chasing imaginary dragons, while Rosa watched from a bench in the shade. His laughter drifted up through the open window, bright and unshadowed. He'd had nightmares for 2 weeks after the attack, waking up crying for Mama and Papa. But children were resilient. Now 3 months later, he barely remembered that night. Emma wished she could forget as easily. The headline on the tablet lying on the dresser read, "Valentino crime family sues for peace." Below it, a photo of Julian Valentino in a wheelchair, his legs useless, his career as an enforcer ended. He'd received a life sentence and the doctor said he'd never walk again. The fall had shattered his spine. Emma should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt tired. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Victoria entered without waiting for permission, as was her way. She carried a large box, which she set on the bed. "The dress arrived," Victoria announced. "Come, you need to try it on." Emma followed Victoria to the dressing room, a space the size of her old apartment, lined with mirrors and racks of clothing that still felt foreign. Designer labels, silk and cashmere. Things Emma had never imagined owning. The wedding dress was Italian lace, off the shoulder, with a cathedral train that pooled on the floor like water. A seamstress appeared from somewhere and helped Emma into it, her practiced hands making quick work of the tiny buttons that ran up the back. Victoria circled her, inspecting, her critical eye missing nothing. "You look adequate," she finally said. Coming from Victoria, it was high praise. Emma studied her reflection. She looked different than she had 3 months ago. The exhaustion was gone from her face. She'd gained weight, healthy weight, filling out the hollows in her cheeks. Her hair was glossy from proper nutrition and professional care. She looked like someone who belonged in this dress, in this house, in this life. But inside, she still felt like a waitress from South Chicago who'd gotten in way over her head. "You know why I pushed for this marriage?" Victoria asked suddenly. Emma met her eyes in the mirror. "Because I'm the mother of your grandson." "Because you're fierce," Victoria corrected. She moved closer, adjusting the lace at Emma's shoulder. "That night in the nursery, what you did, the story traveled through the families. A mother who fights like a lioness commands respect in our world." Victoria was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer than Emma had ever heard it. "I lost a child before Dominic was born. A daughter. She was 2 weeks old. The doctors called it sudden infant death syndrome, but I always wondered." Emma stilled. Victoria never talked about personal history, never showed vulnerability. "I swore then that the family comes first," Victoria continued. "Always, no matter the cost, no matter who gets hurt. The family survives." She looked at Emma directly. "You understand that now, don't you?" Emma nodded. "I'd do anything to protect Gabriel." "Good." Victoria's usual sharpness returned. "Then you're truly a Castellano." The wedding would be held in the estate gardens the following Saturday. 200 guests, allied families from New York, Boston, Philadelphia, politicians, judges, business leaders who asked no questions about where Castellano money came from. The security would be unprecedented. Snipers on the roof, guards every 20 feet, metal detectors hidden in the flower arrangements. But first, Emma had something to tell Dominic. She found him in his study, a room of dark wood and leather that smelled of old books and expensive whiskey. He was on the phone speaking rapid Italian to someone, but he ended the call when he saw her. "Is everything all right?" Concern flashed across his face. "Gabriel?" "Gabriel's fine." Emma closed the door behind her. "I need to tell you something." Dominic stood, coming around the desk. Over the past 3 months, things between them had shifted. They shared a bed now, though it had taken weeks before either of them touched the other. They had dinner together every night. They co-parented Gabriel with a coordination that surprised them both. And sometimes late at night they talked, really talked, about the masquerade, about the 3 years apart, about the people they'd been and the people they were becoming. Emma didn't know if it was love, but it was something real. "I'm pregnant," she said. Dominic froze. He stared at her like he hadn't heard correctly. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 6 weeks, I think." Emma pulled the pregnancy test from her pocket, where she'd been carrying it for 2 days, trying to find the courage to tell him. "I took 3 tests. They were all positive." For a moment, Dominic didn't react. Then slowly a smile broke across his face. Not the cold smile he used for business. A real smile, genuine and unguarded. "You're certain?" His voice was rough with emotion. "As certain as 3 positive tests can make me." Dominic laughed, the sound startling in its joy. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, lifting Emma off her feet and spinning her in a circle. When he set her down, his hands went immediately to her stomach, still flat but holding the promise of life. "Another child," he said reverently. "Another chance. This time you're here from the beginning," Emma said. "This time you don't miss anything." Dominic pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I love you, Emma Castellano." It was the first time he'd said it, the first time either of them had said it. Emma's breath caught. "I love you too, Dominic." And she realized with a start that it was true. Somewhere between the terror and the violence and the quiet moments watching him read bedtime stories to Gabriel, she'd fallen in love with the monster who'd become her protector. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Outside, Gabriel's laughter rang through the gardens. Inside, a new life was beginning. "We should tell Mother," Dominic said. "She already knows," Emma replied. "She figured it out 2 days ago. Something about me not drinking wine and looking pale in the mornings." Dominic chuckled. "Of course she did." Then his expression grew serious. "Emma, there's something you should know. We have intelligence that Julian's younger sister, Isabella, she's not part of the peace treaty." Emma's stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means she's been quiet for 3 months, but she's planning something. And if she finds out you're pregnant—" He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Emma lifted her chin. "Then we deal with it, as a family." The gardens of the Castellano estate had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. White roses everywhere, thousands of them, their petals perfect despite the late spring heat. An arch of woven branches and trailing ivy stood at the end of a white carpet that ran through the manicured lawn. String quartet playing pachelbel. Guests in their finest glittering with jewelry and importance. But Emma barely saw any of it. She stood in the dressing room, Victoria making final adjustments to her veil. Gabriel bounced excitedly in his miniature tuxedo, clutching the ring pillow like it might escape. "Mama pretty," he announced for the 10th time. "Thank you, baby." Emma knelt down, careful of her dress, and kissed his forehead. "Are you ready to be the ring bearer?" "I carry rings," Gabriel said proudly, then frowned. "What's ring bear?" Despite everything, despite the armed guards she could see through the window, despite the weight of the engagement ring that used to belong to Dominic's grandmother, Emma laughed. Rosa appeared in the doorway. "It's time, Mrs. Castellano." "Mrs. Castellano, in 5 minutes it would be official." The walk down the aisle felt surreal. Gabriel went first, marching with exaggerated seriousness while guests chuckled. Then Emma. No father to give her away because she had no family left. She was doing this herself, choosing this herself. Dominic waited at the altar in a custom tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of a film about Italian royalty. But it was his eyes that caught her, the brown and the gray blue, watching her approach with an expression that made her breath catch. When she reached him, he held out his hand. Emma took it. The priest began the ceremony, his words washing over her. She heard herself repeating vows, heard Dominic's voice, steady and certain. Gabriel handed over the rings with barely suppressed glee, and then the priest was saying those final words. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Dominic didn't wait. He pulled Emma close and kissed her deeply, thoroughly, claiming her in front of 200 witnesses. When they finally broke apart, he whispered against her lips, "Mine, finally." "Yours," Emma agreed, "always." The reception was held in the grand ballroom. Champagne flowed. The food was exquisite. Emma danced with Dominic while Gabriel watched from Victoria's lap, fighting sleep. As the evening wore on, Emma excused herself to the bathroom. She'd been fighting nausea all day, the pregnancy making itself known. She splashed cold water on her face, studying her reflection. A bride, a wife, a mother, a Castellano. When she returned to the ballroom, Dominic was waiting. He pulled her onto a private terrace overlooking the lake. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small box. Inside was a necklace, delicate gold with a pendant shaped like 2 interlocking hearts. "One for Gabriel," Dominic explained, pointing to the larger heart. "One for the new baby." He placed his hand over her stomach. "Our family." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect." And they stood together, looking out at the water, at the lights of the city in the distance. Emma thought about the waitress she'd been, scrambling for rent money, terrified of being found. That woman felt like someone from another life. "No regrets?" Dominic asked quietly. Emma considered the question. She thought about freedom and safety, about love and fear, about the choices that had led her here. "No regrets," she finally said. This is where I'm supposed to be. Dominic kissed her temple. Where we're supposed to be. Inside, the party continued. Victoria was holding Gabriel, who'd finally fallen asleep, his small face peaceful. Marcus and the other guards maintained their vigilant watch. The Castellano family, together and protected. But in New York City, 300 miles away, Isabella Valentino sat in a dark warehouse across from Viktor Kozlov, head of the Russian mob's American operations. On the table between them lay surveillance photos. Emma and Gabriel at the wedding, close-ups taken with telephoto lenses. Dominic Castellano took my brother's legs, Isabella said. Her voice was cold as winter. Now I take everything he loves. Victor picked up the photo of Emma, studying it with professional interest. And how do you plan to do this? Isabella smiled. It was a terrible smile, beautiful and deadly. By going after his queen. The waitress thinks she's safe behind those walls. She's wrong. The game is just beginning. Victor nodded slowly. I like this plan very much. Isabella slid another photo across the table. This one showed Emma's hand, clearly displaying the engagement ring. But more importantly, it showed the slight swell of her stomach. Barely noticeable, but there. And she's pregnant, Isabella added. 2 birds with 1 stone. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic. Then Victor began to laugh, a low rumbling sound that promised violence. To new partnerships, he said, raising a glass of vodka. To revenge, Isabella replied. Back at the Castellano estate, Emma woke in the middle of the night. Dominic was asleep beside her, one arm thrown protectively across her waist. Through the open window, she could hear the guards making their rounds. The estate was secure. Gabriel was safe in his room. The baby growing inside her was protected. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Some storm on the horizon that she couldn't yet see. She placed her hand over Dominic's, over the place where their child was growing, and whispered a promise into the darkness. I'll keep us safe, all of us, whatever it takes. Outside, the moon hung full and bright over the Castellano estate. Inside the walls, a family slept. And in the shadows beyond, enemies were already making their plans. The waitress had served her final table. The queen had taken her throne. But the game of survival was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning.